If there's one town in Britain that sums up the brutality of medieval England and its borders, I'd say you're looking at it. Firstly, for a bit of background, Great Britain has only existed essentially since 1707, when an Act of Union made England and Scotland an official joint monarchy, despite having shared monarchs since 1603. Prior to then, let's just say we weren't on as good terms with our Scottish neighbours as we are today. To get a feel for this, you only have to come to the border counties of Cumbria and Northumberland, and the clues will present themselves. One of the main clues being a high concentration of castles, which were built not to deter the French, as is the case with castles on the south coast, but to deter the Scots. The Domesday Book of 1086, commissioned by William the Conqueror, reveals a few insights about 11th century Scotland. Insights by omission, that is, because this survey of landholdings in England contains no reference to either the town we're about to explore in depth, or to Carlisle. That's because both of these were, in fact, Scottish at the time. Carlisle would soon flip to England, however, thanks to William's son and successor, William II. An entry for the year 1092 from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states that William Rufus, as he was also known, went north to Carlisle with a great army, built the castle and garrisoned it with his men, and drove out the previous ruler, a local lord. With no record of a battle taking place at the time, this would imply that the takeover was, to all intents and purposes, unopposed. The same can certainly not be said, however, for our main subject matter, and with that, let's take an in-depth look at Berwick-upon-Tweed. Half a century before the Norman conquest, the Scots had taken control of Berwick from the Northumbrians following a victory at the Battle of Carham. Little is known about the battle itself, even the exact year is disputed, but what we do know is the Scots scored a decisive victory and established this very river, the Tweed, as the border between England and Scotland along much of its course up to the mouth. And it was this river mouth that would shape Berwick's future in more ways than one. In the decades that followed, it transformed into a thriving Scottish port town, exporting wool to continental Europe and importing wine and spices. In the early 12th century, King David I made it a royal burgh, which is to say the closest equivalent to a city in medieval Scotland, and by 1153 a royal mint was established here. But things were about to take a drastic turn. In 1173, the Scottish King William I, aka William the Lion, marched south in an apparent attempt to exploit a perceived weakness in the English king, Henry II, who was facing an uprising led by his own sons and disaffected barons. William's incursion into England was short-lived, but he mounted a second attempt the following year. In July of 1174, focus would shift southwards to the nearby town of Alnwick, as one of the many Northumbrian castles alluded to earlier would be put to the test. William had made a major misjudgment. Not only did the castle hold, but the English forces captured him and took him to Normandy as a hostage. Henry II dictated the terms for William's release. Among these terms was fealty to Henry and the surrender of 5 Scottish castles: Edinburgh, Stirling, Jedburgh, Roxburgh and Berwick-upon-Tweed. The treaty was annulled just 15 years later when Richard I asked William for money to fund the Third Crusade. Berwick was once again Scottish, but its darkest chapter was still ahead. In 1292, during a period in which the throne of Scotland had no clear heir, the King of England, Edward I, was brought in to mediate. Edward selected John Balliol as King of Scotland in what's believed to be a strategic move, as Balliol was considered a puppet king. But just a few years later, after repeated humiliations, the puppet king turned on his puppeteer. Balliol formed an alliance with France, and the Scots would once again raid northern England. This was all the pretext needed for a devastating counterattack of medieval proportions. Having amassed an army of around 30,000, Edward marched north. By all accounts, the Scottish, who were outnumbered by about 3-1, succumbed quickly. What happened next, though, would shake Scotland to its core. While the possibility of propaganda is very real, the best I can do is present the words of the contemporary chroniclers with no further input. For 2 days the slaughter continued, sparing neither man, woman, nor child, save those who fled to churches. Many thousands perished, cleansing the town of rebels. The king, in his wrath, ordered no quarter given. Many thousands of Scots were slain, their bodies filling the streets, until Edward spared those in churches. A great slaughter followed, with countless souls, men, women, and innocents, cut down by the English, leaving the streets red with blood. Well, you get the idea. Civilian death estimates range from 4,000 to 10,000. But just to point out that there were atrocities on both sides in this period, the point here is merely to emphasise the haunted past of Berwick in particular. This siege marked the beginning of the First Scottish War of Independence. That's the one depicted in Braveheart, by the way. Berwick-upon-Tweed would change hands about a dozen times over subsequent decades, and that's no exaggeration. Finally, in 1482, it was secured one final time for the English, and the man responsible, believe it or not, the future King Richard III. Yes, the man who may or may not have slain his own nephews was the mastermind behind what is suggested to have been a much cleaner siege of Berwick than that of 1296. The Tudor era, initiated by Richard's death at Bosworth Field, saw improvements to the fortifications, not only of Berwick, with upgraded town walls, much like what you've already seen, but of the other major frontier settlements along this border. Carlisle Citadel, whose initial construction was ordered by Henry VIII to safeguard against further Scottish uprisings, comes with one of the most extraordinary claims, as cited on BritainExpress.com, regarding the installation of artillery in the 1540s. When the guns were finally installed, they did not point south towards England, but north over the city itself. The message was clear. If the Scots invaded, Henry was quite prepared to destroy Carlisle, rather than see it in Scottish hands. Was this anything more than a legend? Who knows? But one thing's for sure, Henry was not about to give back to the Scots what William Rufus had fought to gain 4.5 centuries ago. When the Acts of Union came into effect in 1707, Queen Anne effectively became the first monarch of Great Britain, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, except for the young pretender Bonnie Prince Charlie trying to usurp the throne from the German Hanover family later that century, but by and large, the England-Scotland border has been a soft one ever since. In fact, this is a border that would become known for almost the entire opposite reason to medieval bloodshed. I'm referring, of course, to Gretna Green. Just over the River Sark, which has been the natural border at the western end since Charles I's reign, is where you'll find this unassuming village. Its rise to fame stemmed from 1754, the year in which an Act of Parliament came into effect, making it law that couples had to be at least 21 years of age to marry without the consent of their parents. But there was a loophole. The law only applied to marriages carried out in England and Wales. Being the first coaching stop on the stagecoach road north of Carlisle, establishments in Gretna Green were keen to facilitate the wishes of young lovers, including a local blacksmith. Weddings were carried out over an anvil rather than an altar, as new bonds were forged, so to speak. Due to the controversy among the establishment forces, a further act in 1856 was introduced to stipulate that if a couple wished to marry in Scotland, one of them had to spend 21 days living here before marriage. This may have curbed the spontaneous elopements, but it was great news for the locals, who were able to take in lodgers for about 21 days. The practice came to an end, though, in 1940, when Scotland officially outlawed these irregular marriages, or anvil weddings as they became known. Nevertheless, the blacksmith shop that was at the heart of it all, so to speak, is going from strength to strength in its current form as a heritage museum. Meanwhile, Berwick-upon-Tweed, with its walkable walls, is a popular destination for history lovers on both sides of the border in these friendlier times. As an amusing postscript, both the town's football club and rugby union club play in Scottish leagues. And as for the Scottish side of the border, well, we've barely scratched the surface here, but this is where you'll find an entire selection of stunning towns, criminally overlooked for one reason or another, but that may be the topic of a future video. If Gretna Green has proven anything though, it's that the England-Scotland border can be more about the lovers, not the fighters. Thanks for watching and have a great day.